The security officer's hand moved to his radio. His eyes swept over the young woman standing before him at the gate to the restricted flight line. Jeans, civilian jacket, worn flight bag over one shoulder. She didn't look like she belonged here. "I need to see your authorization," he said, "and an explanation for why you're carrying a pilot's gear." She reached into her jacket slowly, pulled out an ID card and a folded set of orders. The guard studied them, his frown deepening with each passing second. "These have to be fake," he said. "This says you're qualified on the F-35. Lady, I don't know what you're trying to pull, but impersonating a military pilot is a federal offense." 2 more guards appeared. One already had his hand on his sidearm. The other was speaking into his radio, voice clipped and urgent, requesting backup for a potential security breach. The woman didn't argue, didn't raise her voice. She simply stood there with her hands visible, patient as stone, while they surrounded her. Her dark blue eyes held something the guards couldn't recognize. Not fear, not anger, something quieter. Something forged in places they'd never been. Her name was Lieutenant Soren Beck, and in 6 hours every person on this base would know it. But first they had to stop treating her like a criminal. The detention room smelled like stale coffee and decades of fluorescent lighting. Concrete walls, metal table, 2 chairs bolted to the floor. Soren sat in one of them, her hands resting loose and uncuffed on the tabletop. Through her patience, something else flickered. Weariness, maybe. Or resignation that this was how it always went. She was 31 years old. Lean and compact, built for the tight confines of a fighter cockpit. Her auburn hair was pulled back in a regulation bun, revealing a face that was more interesting than beautiful. Sharp cheekbones, a slight scar along her left jawline, eyes that seemed to calculate angles and vectors even at rest. The duty officer across from her was shuffling her papers like they might suddenly make sense. Captain Fitz, graying at the temples, 20 years in logistics, completely out of his depth. "Your file says you've been flying transports in Germany," he said. "C-130s. So why does your ID claim fighter qualification?" "Because I have it," Soren said. Her voice was low and even. "Check my service record, all of it." "I'm looking at your service record, transport pilot, that's what you are." "That's what I've been assigned to fly. It's not what I'm qualified for." Fitz set the papers down, leaned back, studied her with the practiced skepticism of someone who'd seen every con and shortcut the military had to offer. "You're telling me you're secretly fighter qualified? And nobody knows about it?" "One person knows," Soren said. "Colonel Dennison. He's the one who requested me." "For what?" "I don't know. The orders just said to report here, Edwards Air Force Base, today." Fitz picked up her ID card again, squinted at the qualification codes printed in tiny letters along the edge, shook his head like he was rejecting a bad hand of cards. "I'm going to make some calls," he said. "You sit tight." He left, the door locked with a heavy click. Soren closed her eyes, breathed deep, let her mind drift back to where this had all started. To the person who'd taught her that bureaucracy and capability were 2 different things. Her father had been a test pilot, Colonel Marcus Beck. Not famous, not celebrated, but respected by the people who mattered. The engineers who built the planes, the pilots who pushed them to their limits. He'd flown things that didn't have names yet. Things that existed only in classified hangars and budget line items hidden in duty spreadsheets. She'd grown up on Air Force bases, spent her childhood watching jets scream into desert skies. Her father had started teaching her aerodynamics before she was old enough to understand algebra. By 15, she could read a performance chart. By 17, she could calculate fuel burn and optimal glide ratios in her head. He'd died when she was 23. Engine failure during a test flight over Nevada. Malfunction, not pilot error. But it didn't matter. Dead was dead. Soren had been a year into her Air Force career, flying trainers following the standard pipeline. After the funeral, she'd found his notebooks. Decades of observations. Hand-drawn diagrams. Notes on aircraft handling characteristics that weren't in any manual. He'd been trying to leave her something. A legacy. Knowledge that couldn't be taken away. She'd spent the next 8 years teaching herself everything he'd known and more. Studied fighter tactics on her own time. Ran simulations until the flight characteristics were muscle memory. Built relationships with pilots who'd let her observe. Who'd explain the things the manuals left out. She'd flown civilian aerobatic aircraft on weekends, pushing herself through maneuvers that made her vision tunnel and her arms shake. When she'd finally finagled her way into a fighter qualification course, on a technicality, through a program that was quietly being shuttered, she'd finished top of her class, not by a little. By a lot, the Air Force hadn't known what to do with her. Female fighter pilots weren't rare anymore, but female fighter pilots who came up through the transport pipeline, who qualified themselves through sheer stubborn competence. That was still unusual enough to be awkward. They'd thanked her for her initiative. Then they'd sent her back to flying cargo planes in Europe. She hadn't complained. She'd flown the C-130s, done her job, waited, and apparently someone had been watching. The door opened. Captain Fitz returned, but he wasn't alone. Behind him came a colonel, tall, silver-haired, with the weathered face of someone who'd spent decades in cockpits. He wore a flight suit with patches Soren recognized. Test pilot wings, experimental aircraft divisions. Colonel Dennison. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he turned to Fitz. "She's with me," he said. "Release her. With respect, her credentials are legitimate, I should know. I signed her qualification papers myself. 7 years ago." Fitz blinked. "You what?" "Lieutenant Beck came through the fighter transition program under my supervision. She was the most naturally gifted pilot I'd seen in 15 years. And yes, I'm aware the Air Force never gave her a fighter assignment, which is why I requested her now." "For what mission?" Dennison's expression hardened into something Fitz couldn't read. "The kind that doesn't go into reports. Let her go. That's an order." 10 minutes later, Soren was walking across the flight line with Dennison. The afternoon sun turned the concrete into a furnace. Heat shimmered off the tarmac in liquid waves. Around them, aircraft sat in neat rows. F-22s, F-35s, experimental drones that didn't have public designations yet. "I thought you'd retired," Soren said. "I did. Then they pulled me back for this." Dennison's jaw tightened. "We have a problem. Big one. And I need someone who can fly anything under any conditions, without official backup." "What kind of problem?" He stopped walking, turned to face her. Behind him, a hangar door stood open, revealing darkness and the shadowed bulk of something large. 3 days ago, a prototype aircraft went down in hostile territory. Autonomous combat drone. Classified beyond top secret. If it falls into the wrong hands, it compromises every air defense system we have. "Why not send special forces?" "The terrain makes helicopter insertion impossible. Fixed-wing paradrop would take too long to organize and would telegraph our intentions. We need someone who can fly in fast and low, land on a makeshift strip in the mountains, and get that drone's core systems before the recovery team arrives." He paused. "The official answer is it can't be done. The aircraft required doesn't exist. The pilot doesn't exist. But unofficially? Unofficially, I know a pilot who can fly things that shouldn't fly, and I know we have something in that hangar that shouldn't exist." He gestured toward the dark opening. "Interested?" Soren looked at the hangar, at the heat haze rising from the desert, at the sky that had owned her heart since before she could remember. "Show me," she said. The aircraft inside the hangar was beautiful in the way that weapons are beautiful. Sleek. Purposeful. Built with no compromise between form and function. It looked like someone had crossbred an F-35 with a bush plane and added stealth characteristics that bent light in strange ways. "Tactical infiltration prototype," Dennison said. "Short takeoff and landing capability. Terrain following radar. Stealth coating that makes it almost invisible to radar and infrared. Top speed classified but fast enough. Range. Barely sufficient for a one-way trip." "One way? There'll be a tanker for refuel on the way out if you make it that far." Soren walked around the aircraft slowly. Ran her hand along the wing edge. Felt the strange texture of the coating. Not quite smooth, not quite rough. Like touching something that existed slightly outside normal physics. "Who else knows about this mission?" "4 people, you, me. The general who authorized it, and the Secretary of Defense. If this goes wrong, it never happened. You were never here. This aircraft doesn't exist, and if I say no," Dennison met her eyes, "then I'll find someone else. But they won't be as good as you." And the odds of mission success dropped to nearly 0. She looked at the aircraft again, at the impossible thing they were asking her to do. Fly into a foreign country without permission. Land on terrain that wasn't designed for landing. Extract classified material under time pressure. Get out alive. Her father's voice echoed in her memory, not from life, but from his notebooks. Scribbled in the margins next to a particularly complex aerodynamic calculation. The difficult is done immediately. The impossible takes a little longer. "When do I leave?" Soren asked. "Dawn. Wheels up at 0500. You'll have 4 hours of darkness to get in, land, secure the payload, and get to the refuel point." Dennison handed her a tablet. "Terrain maps, weather forecasts, emergency extraction coordinates if it goes completely sideways. Memorize everything. The tablet stays here." Soren took it. Started scrolling through the data. Her mind was already calculating approach angles, fuel consumption rates, backup landing zones. The kind of math that came easier to her than breathing. The landing site is a valley in the Hindu Kush, Dennison continued. 1,200 feet long, slight upslope, rock and hard dirt, no margin for error. Obstacles. Mountains on 3 sides, single approach vector from the southeast, strong crosswinds likely, and you'll be flying without lights, using night vision and terrain-following radar. Sounds fun, Dennison almost smiled. I knew you were the right choice. Your father would have said the same thing. Something tightened in Soren's chest, but she kept her expression neutral. Kept scrolling through the mission data like this was just another training exercise. There's one more thing, Dennison said. The drone that went down. It was being pursued when it crashed. We have reason to believe hostile forces know approximately where it is. You might not be alone up there. What kind of hostile forces? The kind with guns, and a very strong incentive to get to that drone before you do. Soren looked up from the tablet. You're asking me to start a war. I'm asking you to prevent one. If that drone systems are compromised, the next real war gets a lot harder to win. This is theft prevention. Very expensive theft prevention. He gestured to the aircraft. Get some rest, study the mission profile. I'll see you at 0400 for final brief. He turned to leave. Stopped at the hangar door. Lieutenant Beck, don't get caught, and don't die. I have enough ghosts already. Then he was gone. And Soren was alone with the impossible aircraft and the impossible mission and the certainty that she'd been preparing for this her entire life without knowing it. The base accommodations gave her a room that smelled like military-grade disinfectant and old paint. She didn't sleep. Instead, she sat cross-legged on the bed with the mission data burned into her memory and her father's old watch on her wrist, the only thing of his she still carried. Outside, the desert night was full of distant jet noise, engines screaming, pilots training for wars that might never come, or might come tomorrow. She thought about the men at the gate who'd detained her, about Captain Fitz who'd looked at her papers like they were forgeries, about every assignment officer who'd seen transport pilot and never looked deeper, never saw what she'd built herself into during those off-duty hours when everyone else was drinking beer and watching sports. This mission was a chance. Not for glory, nobody would ever know about it if it succeeded, but for validation. Proof that the years of self-directed study and relentless practice had meant something. That her father's legacy lived in more than notebooks and memories. She checked her watch. 3 hours until brief. She closed her eyes. Not to sleep, but to fly the mission in her mind. To see every waypoint, every mountain ridge, every potential problem before it happened. By the time she opened her eyes again, she'd landed that aircraft in that valley 100 times. In her head, she was already there. The briefing room was empty except for Dennison and a technician who looked too young to be cleared for anything this classified. The tech handed her a flight suit, custom fitted, though she'd never been measured, and a helmet with integrated night vision and heads-up display. Communications will be limited, Dennison said. You'll have a secure channel to me. Use it only if absolutely necessary. Radio silence is your friend. Weapons? The aircraft has none. You're a ghost. Ghosts don't shoot back. He slid a pistol across the table. Personal defense only. If you're in a position where you need to use that, the mission's already failed. Soren picked up the weapon, checked it, holstered it. The drone's core is in a hardened case, the tech said. His voice cracked slightly with nerves. 30 pounds, shoulder harness provided. Once you extract it, do not attempt to open or access it. The security protocols will fry the contents if tampered with. Understood. Flight time to target is 3 hours and 40 minutes, Dennison said. You'll have a 15-minute window from touchdown to extraction and takeoff. After that, the weather deteriorates. Clouds roll in. You lose your visual reference and you lose your life. Weather's always a factor. This isn't weather. This is terrain-channeled winds and orographic lifting, creating instant zero visibility. Miss your window and you're spending a very cold night in the mountains waiting for hostile forces to find you. Soren nodded, pulled on the flight suit. It fit perfectly. Someone had done their homework. Any questions? Dennison asked. What's my call sign for this mission? He smiled then, thin and sharp. Ghost 7 seems appropriate. Ghost 7, roger that. They walked to the hangar in the pre-dawn darkness. Stars blazed overhead, cold and distant. The aircraft waited like a predator at rest. Ground crew moved around it with the efficient silence of people who knew how to keep secrets. Soren did her walk around, checked every surface, every panel, every control linkage. She climbed into the cockpit and the canopy closed over her with a hermetic seal. The instrument panel glowed to life. Systems initialized in sequence. Everything was foreign and familiar at once. Different controls, same principles. Different machine, same sky. Go 7 radio check, she said. Lima Charlie, Dennison's voice came back. You're cleared to taxi. Godspeed, Lieutenant. She advanced the throttle. The aircraft rolled forward with surprising agility. The taxiway lights painted amber lines through the darkness. At the end of the runway, she stopped, ran through the final checks. Everything was green. Everything was ready. Go 7, you are cleared for takeoff. Winds 210 at 8 knots. Altimeter 299er2. Go 7 rolling. She pushed the throttles forward. The aircraft surged ahead, pressing her back into the seat. The runway lights became a blur. She felt the wings take the weight. Felt that moment of transition when the aircraft stopped being a ground vehicle and became what it was meant to be. A creature of the air. A thing of speed and purpose. She pulled back, gear up, climbing into the darkness. Behind her, Edwards Air Force Base fell away. Ahead, the mission waited. And Soren Beck, who'd been detained 6 hours earlier as a suspected impersonator, disappeared into the night with $1 million prototype and a mission that officially didn't exist. The flight to the target zone was a study in concentration. She flew low, following terrain contours that the navigation system painted in green lines on her display. Mountains rose around her like teeth. The aircraft handled beautifully, responsive, stable, forgiving of the small corrections she made as winds tried to push her off course. 3 hours into the flight, the radio crackled. Ghost 7, be advised, intelligence update. You may have company. Satellite detected vehicle. Movement in the target valley. 2 trucks. Armed personnel estimated at 12 to 15. Soren's jaw tightened. Can they reach the crash site before I do? Negative. They're approaching from the north. You'll arrive first, but your window just got smaller. Extract and exfiltrate immediately. Copy that. She checked her fuel, checked her navigation. 15 minutes to target. The sky ahead was beginning to lighten, false dawn painting the eastern horizon with gray light. She'd be landing in twilight. Shadows everywhere. Depth perception compromised. Perfect. The valley appeared in her heads-up display first, a narrow cut between peaks barely visible in the pre-dawn murk. She descended, slowing, configuring the aircraft for landing. Flaps down. Gear down. A-speed bleeding off. The landing zone rushed up to meet her, a rough strip of dirt and stone that looked impossibly short. She touched down hard. Reverse thrust screaming. The aircraft shuddered and bounced. Rocks pinged off the fuselage. She stood on the brakes. Felt the tires bite. Felt the aircraft slow. Stop, 200 feet of runway behind her. She'd used 1,000. Soren killed the engines. Popped the canopy. The mountain air hit her like a slap, thin and cold and sharp with the smell of stone and snow. She grabbed the shoulder harness and dropped to the ground. The drone was 50 yards away. She could see it now, a broken shape on the valley floor, one wing sheared off, the fuselage cracked but largely intact. She ran toward it, boots crunching on loose rock. Behind her, in the distance, she heard engines. Trucks, coming closer. The drone's access panel was marked with biohazard warnings and classified equipment labels. She found the release mechanism. Pulled. The core came free. A metal case the size of a large briefcase, heavy with whatever secrets it held. She hooked it to the harness. Started back toward her aircraft. That's when the first shots rang out. Bullets sparked off rocks to her left. She dropped, rolled, came up running. The trucks had arrived faster than predicted. Men were spilling out, shouting in a language she didn't speak. More shots. Closer this time. She reached the aircraft. Hauled herself into the cockpit. Secured the core in the equipment bay. Closed the canopy. Engine spooling up. Too slow. Too damn slow. A bullet starred the canopy glass. Reinforced polymer held. She pushed the throttles forward. The aircraft lurched ahead. More bullets. She heard them impact the fuselage. Heard something important crack. But the aircraft was moving. Accelerating. The valley was impossibly short, but she was committed now. Full throttle. Wings lifting. Men diving out of the way. She rotated. Pulled back. The aircraft clawed into the air with 50 feet of runway to spare. Banking hard left. Climbing. Bullets still chasing but falling away now. She was up. She was clear. Go 7, we heard gunfire. Status. Mission accomplished. Taking fire. Aircraft damaged. Assessing. She scanned the instruments. Hydraulic pressure dropping on the primary system. Backup was holding. Engine temperatures normal. She'd taken hits, but nothing catastrophic. Not yet. Copy, proceed to refuel point. Tanker is orbiting. She turned southwest. Climbed to altitude. The sun was rising now, painting the mountains in shades of gold and shadow. Beautiful and utterly indifferent to the small drama that had just played out in their valleys. The refuel took 20 minutes. The tanker crew didn't ask questions. They matched her speed, lowered the boom, and watched as she connected with a precision that betrayed her thousands of hours in the cockpit. Fuel flowed. Tanks filled. She disconnected, turned for home. Edwards came into view 4 hours later, the California desert stretching forever. She entered the pattern, called for landing clearance. Ghost 7, you are cleared to land. Emergency equipment standing by as precaution. Negative on emergency aircraft is controllable. She brought it down smooth. Greased the landing despite the hydraulic damage. Rolled to a stop on the taxiway. Ground crew surrounded her immediately, towing the aircraft into the same classified hangar it had left from. Dennison was waiting when she climbed out. Behind him stood 3 other people. A general. A woman in a civilian suit she recognized as the Secretary of Defense from news photographs. And Captain Fitz, looking deeply confused. Lieutenant Beck, the general said. You've just completed a mission that saved us from a strategic intelligence catastrophe. Well done. Soren saluted. Thank you, sir. The Secretary of Defense stepped forward. I understand you were detained yesterday, suspected of impersonating a pilot. Yes, ma'am. Captain Fitz, you want to explain that? Fitz looked like he wanted to disappear into the concrete. Ma'am, her credentials seemed inconsistent with her appearance. I was following security protocols. Her credentials, the secretary said, are impeccable. Her qualification record is exemplary, and she just flew a mission that most of our pilots wouldn't attempt. She turned to Soren. I'm told you've been flying transports for the past several years. Yes, ma'am. C-130s in Europe. How would you feel about a transfer? Something more in line with your actual capabilities? Soren glanced at Dennison. He was smiling that thin smile again. This had been planned. All of it. The mission, the audience, the recognition. Good. Report to Colonel Dennison's office tomorrow. You'll be joining his test flight division, effective immediately. The secretary paused. And Captain Fitz, next time someone presents credentials that seem inconsistent with their appearance, consider that maybe your assumptions need updating, not their papers. Yes, ma'am. They left. All except Dennison. He looked at Soren with something that might have been pride. He said quietly, You knew him? We flew together 20 years ago. He was the one who taught me that the best pilots aren't the ones who follow every rule. They're the ones who understand which rules matter and which ones are just bureaucracy. He handed her a folder. Your new assignment. You'll be testing aircraft that don't have names yet. Flying missions that don't get briefed. It's dangerous. It's classified. And it's the most important flying you'll ever do. Soren took the folder. Opened it. Saw aircraft designs that looked like science fiction. Mission profiles that pushed every boundary she knew. When do I start? Tomorrow. But today? He gestured toward the hangar exit. Go get some rest. You've earned it. She walked out into the desert sunlight. The base was coming alive with the morning shift. Jets taxiing. Personnel moving between buildings. Somewhere, someone was being trained on procedures and protocols and the proper way to follow orders. And somewhere else, in classified hangars and restricted airspace, pilots like her were doing the impossible. Quietly. Without recognition. Because the job mattered more than the glory. Soren looked at her father's watch. Checked the time. Smiled. The difficult was done. The impossible was just getting started. 6 months later, her name appeared on a classified list of test pilots qualified for experimental combat aircraft. A year after that, she flew a prototype that broke 3 different records in a single sortie. 2 years after that, she trained the next generation of pilots who'd been overlooked by conventional channels. Who'd taught themselves. Who'd proven themselves in the margins. The gate guards never detained her again. Not because they recognized her face, but because they'd learned to look deeper. To check the call signs. To understand that competence doesn't always look the way you expect it to. And on a shelf in her quarters next to her father's notebooks and his old watch, she kept a framed photograph. The prototype aircraft, Ghost 7. The machine that had carried her from obscurity to purpose. From detention to destiny. Some missions never make it into the official record. Some pilots never get their names in the news. But in the quiet spaces where it matters, in the classified briefings, in the dangerous skies, in the impossible missions, they're legends. Lieutenant Soren Beck was one of them, and she'd earned it the hard way. One flight at a time. One impossible mission at a time. Proving that the only thing that really matters is whether you can fly when it counts. The rest is just paperwork. If you have enjoyed the story, tell YouTube to send you more stories like this by subscribing to this channel, liking the video, and leaving a comment.